Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've heard testimony today about a culture of lawlessness in Washington, D.C., and how crime rates are absolutely staggering. And this is, of course, sadly true in other places across the United States, in Manhattan, in Chicago, in San Francisco, and Los Angeles. But D.C. is a particularly compelling case study because of the unique nature of the district as a sort of self-contained jurisdiction. It allows us to really parse the different elements of that culture of lawlessness and how they've become mutually reinforcing in a way that has caused crime to spiral out of control. And specifically, those elements would be the laws, police, prosecutors, and judges. So starting first with the laws, Detective Pemberton, you represent 3,000 sworn officers, is that right?
Yes, sir. Excuse me. Yes, sir. That's correct.
Thank you for your service and for all of them for the incredibly important and dangerous work that they do on a daily basis. You described in your testimony a spate of anti-police legislation such as the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act of 2020, the Revised Criminal Code Amendment Act of 2021, the Reducing Law Enforcement Presence in Schools Act of 2021. How would you summarize the overall effect of this legislation on criminal penalties in the district?
Well, it's very wide-reaching. So the first thing I would point to is the staffing levels and the morale within the police department. And as I stated in my testimony, I think we're down somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 police officers from where we were just before this legislation was introduced. The legislation is designed to hamper and hamstring police officers and make it absolutely difficult for them to do their jobs. And in addition to that, it exposes them to liability of administrative, civil, and even criminal penalties, even when they go out and do their job properly, responsibly, and constitutionally. So the one major aspect of that is that people will leave an agency. They don't want to work under those sort of onerous provisions. But the other part of it is that it has a chilling effect, that there are still obviously thousands of police officers that have not left the agency, but there's a second guessing as to whether or not they want to engage in the positive, proactive policing that they used to engage in, which was so effective at keeping these crime rates low. So those are the two major aspects of what has happened, at least to the rank and file. But as you stated in your question, the effects go into the entire ecosystem, as the deputy mayor mentioned.
That's right.
Every aspect of the criminal justice system in D.C. is broken, and the reason it's broken is because of these laws that the D.C. Council.
And so that actually answers my next question. So you have this lowering of penalties across the board, and then even where penalties exist, you just still have someone who needs to get caught in order to be subject to those penalties. And the defunding of police and the anti-police rhetoric from politicians here has decreased that presence in the city. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. So when we talk about this ecosystem of criminal justice, the front end of that, the intake system, is police officers putting handcuffs on people who they have probable cause to believe committed a crime. If we're not doing that, a lot of the stuff downstream of that, prosecutions, judges, supervision, that has very little effect because the number of people that we're actually arresting and bringing in.
That's right. And then when we go downstream, Mr. Stimson used to work for the chief prosecutor here. How do the prosecution rates here compare to other jurisdictions?
So I've worked in 4 DA offices, and here this is the highest declination rate of any of those 4 DA offices. As I said in my written testimony and in my oral statement, take 2 like-sized city DA offices. San Diego has 330 DAs. The U.S. Attorney's Office has 330 DAs. As was just mentioned, there's 700,000 residents here in the district, which is about 2,000 and some persons per prosecutor. San Diego has 3.2 million residents in the county. So those prosecutors each serve about 9,000 plus residents. Yet the San Diego DA's office in the last 20 years has a 22.6% declination rate and a 77% issuance rate of charges. And so San Diego doesn't have a crime problem. And I would respectfully disagree with one of the other witnesses and those who mentioned that crime only spiked during COVID. It actually started going up in 2016. in cities with soft on crime prosecutors.
And then you also testified as to how the judges in this district tend to have much lighter sentencing than in other jurisdictions as well. So at each stage of it, you have an unavailability of serious penalties. You have a limited police presence because of defunding and other anti-police policies. You have a very high declination rate by the prosecutor, and then even when people are prosecuted, very light sentences for the judges. And so that culture of lawlessness has contributed to this jurisdiction having a higher murder rate than anywhere else in the country, and these absolutely staggering crime statistics that we heard. Now, I'm out of time, but just as a final question, Detective Pemberton, I think that perhaps the biggest thing that we can do to change that culture of lawlessness is to create a new level of support for law enforcement, to recruit more folks into the profession, to improve morale. Do you have thoughts on how we can do that?
Gentleman's time has expired, but Detective Pemberton, you may respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, that's right. So these, particularly when we're talking about these bills passed by the City Council, the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Act, this is absolutely detrimental to the hiring and the attrition rates of the Metropolitan Police Department. Without getting rid of at least some of the provisions within that bill, it's going to be impossible for us to staff the police departments at the level that meets the demand that's out there for citizens who are requesting police services.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Jackson-Lee.